as a buyer, I'm incentivized to find the best performing inventory in the best performing network. But as a seller, I'm incentivized to ensure that I'm trying to capture as much of spend as possible. So in a world where, for example, and I made this argument internally, if we don't work with a unity and a buyer that is spending a tremendous amount of revenue on acquiring users that we have, and they decide to move all of their budget to Unity, we're not going to see any of that money.
Hello and welcome to Mobile Heroes Uncensored, where we act like idiots so you can look like geniuses. Today, we're chatting about ad monetization. It's sort of kind of a big deal, right? It's a major component in the majority of apps and games' path to profitability. This is an origin stories episode where we go in depth one-on-one with one specific mobile marketing expert. Last time, we chatted about incrementality. Today, ad monetization and ad ops. Peggy, who are we talking to?
Well, you're right, John. A new kind of guest, a new type of show. We're welcoming Daniel Kenny-Godoy. He's Director of Ad Operations and Programmatic at Wattpad. And Wattpad is a global entertainment company leading in social storytelling. So it's a platform for that as well. He has overseen a 15x increase in programmatic revenue across the platform. John, that's why we have him here. That's one of the reasons. Ad ops is totally his space, right? He has worked in digital media and ad monetization for over 12 years with sites such as the Toronto Star, The Verge, NFL.com.
Who's the NFL? Ever heard of them?
NFL? Who's the Toronto Star? And Verge, which I love. Verge rocks. But he's also passionate about community building. We'll talk about that because within the ad space, he has also pursued a mission and helped co-found the ad ops subreddit community, which has grown to become one of the largest ad ops destinations on the internet. So welcome, Daniel.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Peggy and John.
Wonderful. Glad to have you. Got to check out that subreddit. I love Reddit. Mm-hmm. So let's start at the beginning.
Yes, it's great.
How did you happen to fall into mobile ad monetization?
Yeah, so it's a funny story. So I actually originally worked in banking and finance, so learning about lending and investing. And so I moved to Toronto back in 2006 or so, and I fell back in with a number of my university friends. And a few of them had sort of gotten into the marketing and digital space back when, all of this stuff was first being established. And just socially, just through meeting people over time, me being a technical person, I'm always sort of looking at technology and trying to understand how stuff works. And there had been this weird situation where it's every couple of weeks I would be at a gathering or a bar, and it's 2:00 in the morning, and we're sort of all sitting down having drinks. And I ended in these conversations that just all ended up moving in this direction where people were like, "Man, you got to get out of finance, man. Digital is where it's at. There's so much opportunity. It's growing. It's so much more fun." So at some point, an interesting opportunity came up for me to kind of make a lateral move in my career. And I said, this feels like it maybe has a little bit more long-term opportunity for me, and it's a little bit more my scene. So I moved, and within 2 months, I was like, yeah, this is totally my jam.
I'm glad it worked out. I mean, I wouldn't assume that being in banking is great, amazing, huge amounts of fun. So I think you made that move. But I'm glad it worked out. And 2 months later, you felt like, hey, this was the right thing for me. Maybe before we get into some of the biggest challenges, how do you define ad ops?
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things that people don't typically go to school for. And it's one of those hidden jobs that exist, in the digital space. The way I often talk about it, both internally and just sort of conversationally to help people understand, is my team and the work that I do is really spending the time working with the technology and tools that help power the advertising that runs across the internet. So in my particular case, I work with Wattpad as an app and a website. So my team is really responsible for managing all of the ad campaigns and tools that really make sure those ads kind of show up and behave the way that they're supposed to. outside of that, I think, and this sort of falls within sort of the broader ad ops sphere, is you have all of the programmatic yield optimization across all of the different like revenue sources that sort of power advertising, across all of these properties. So it's pretty interesting.
If I can follow up for a moment, I just want to also understand, because we talked about this in prep as well. Ad ops has two sides in your case. You're talking about, hey, I want to deal with the publishers, make certain they get the most out of the inventory that you have. And then there's also optimizing the campaigns. Are both of those within your remit?
For my specific role, yes. The way that the way that we talk about it is that we have sort of like two sides to our core ads business. So we have, on one side, we have a direct sales team that's going out to market. They're pitching to various advertisers and brands, to try and run various campaigns and programs across Wattpad. That's sort of one side. So I have a team that, they're lovely and they run various campaigns and we make sure everything delivers and we're able to, fulfill on the requirements of those various campaigns. But then there's sort of another side, which is what we call the programmatic or yield side. So throughout, and this is what you typically see on many apps in the space, you typically have a number of different, call them, ad technology partners that are integrated through various SDKs into your app. And they basically are responsible for sending you ads when you ask for ads. So all of those systems are sort of designed to sort of integrate in a very holistic fashion. You then sort of have to work through all of the data and reporting across like what you're seeing from each different partner, and then make decisions on how you're gonna decide on who gets to monetize what component of inventory and when and how. So it's a lot of analytical work. It's a lot of like digging and technical troubleshooting to make sure everything functions the way that you expect it to. And then lastly, I'd say that, and this is, I think, pretty common for the industry, there's always something new to learn. So it's an endless barrel of things to learn.
Something always breaks.
Something always breaks, that's right.
So you're sitting in the middle of that. I think it's interesting to understand the full aspects of what ad ops is and where you sit. So what do you find the most challenging in the middle of those three places that you're watching?
So I think when I think about the challenges that we have, I think ultimately there's a couple things. So firstly is there's so much technology that is in this that exists in this space, whether it be on the publisher side, on the monetization side, on the reporting and tooling, side of the business. So I think just keeping up with just everything that's available in the space is something that can be a challenge. The industry is always changing. I was thinking back, a couple of days ago, and it's like 6 months ago we were dealing with, what would the impact of iOS 14.5 and sort of the loss of IDFA and all that stuff, what would that actually have in terms of the impact to our daily revenue. And then today it's like, only a couple of months later, we're like, oh, the platform that we're using to run most of our advertising, which is MoPub, has been acquired by AppLovin. And there's a huge migration that many app publishers are going through right now in order to find the right mediation platform for their needs. So it's like the amount of problems that come up are vast. The way that you're tackling and solving problems is certainly something that you always have to keep an eye on. And then the last thing I'd say, this is something I always try to be mindful, regardless of who I'm working with, whether it be my team or any of the external partners we work with. But the knowledge across the industry is extremely fragmented. The account manager that I might be working with at a partner like Avungle, they might be an expert in their particular space, but not understand the nuances that I'm dealing with, as a non-gaming app. Or, the tooling that we might need for advanced reporting and analytics might not specifically apply for our use case. So we might have to do a lot of translating. So there's always sort of trying to navigate, through a lot of those challenges, which is tricky.
That is not surprising to me at all because ad tech continues to be super fragmented. I mean, we've seen increasing consolidation, right? You talked about it, right? MoPub
Yep.
being bought by
Yeah, for
Apple,
sure.
right? So we're seeing more things being brought together, but there's still so many cases where an ad is going through 5, 6, 7 different layers, waterfalls, auctions, before it actually hits the place where somebody's eyeballs see it. And there's so many complexities there. It does not shock me at all. Maybe let's dive into that actually and talk about that. It's become so much more complex. Programmatic, right? What do you see as different in programmatic now versus a few years ago?
So I think, for good or for bad, the level of complexity and scale has continued to increase. I was in a meeting, with a few of our senior leaders maybe about a year or two ago. And I said, "Hey guys, we're doing great. No questions. We're all super happy. We need to take a moment to recognize that this stuff is only going to continue to get harder. The amount of data that we have access to and what kinds of decisions we can make off of that data will continue to expand. The revenue targets that we want to be able to achieve are going to continue to go up, and all of the changes that are taking place within the industry are going to continue to become more and more complicated. Privacy is a good example. It's like on one side you have one country of the world passes a law, it has to you have to comply in very specific ways. Guess what? Another country passes another law. Their interpretation is like totally different. So now you're actually fragmenting your experience and the way that you approach building solutions to ensure that you're doing what's right by the requirements of the various countries that we have to operate within.
And there's a bunch of things in that, right? I mean, we've seen programmatic starting to evolve from something that used identifiers, whether that was a cookie or an Android ad ID or an IDFA that tracked behavior of eyeballs, devices, people. And we're starting to see a move towards contextual. How's that working? How's that going? We're still seeing some level of fingerprinting in the industry as well. That's not as durable an ID, obviously, right? It's more for attribution. But where are you seeing us in the shift to contextual? And do you see that getting better? And do you see targeting being quite good there at some point?
Yeah, so I think when I take a step back and I think about it, certainly you can get into the weeds and you can talk about there's all of this loss that's going to happen, what's going to happen to all of this revenue. I kind of take a step back and I try to think a little bit more broadly. It's like, ultimately, what are we trying to do here? The app ecosystem specifically exists on people and companies designing experiences that people love, whether they be a reading app like Wattpad or a fun game like, I don't know, insert name of random game here. But it's like, ultimately, the power of the experience and what that looks like is what's most important for people. Now, as it pertains to ads, the way that I look at it is the ideas that are historically used were ultimately not designed to extract the value that the advertising industry has gotten. On the flip side, you have users that are becoming more and more aware of how their data is being used, what's actually happening from a privacy perspective. So their expectation is changing, and the industry needs to evolve in order to ensure that we're doing right by users. At the end of the day, me as a user, I need to understand what I'm actually agreeing to when I'm entering into terms of service with a particular product. And I hope that the industry evolves in such a way that relationship can continue to become more and more transparent and just honest in terms of what that trade-off looks like for users. The way I often talk about it is what we're actually doing in the ad space is it's an exchange of value. So in the case of like a Wattpad, users are coming to find stories and read interesting books. And the exchange that's actually happening is you're getting hours and hours of endless entertainment in exchange for having to watch a couple of ads here or there.
Yeah. Maybe one more question on this on programmatic, and then I think Peggy's got a question about how you boosted the revenue there.
Sure.
We've seen platforms change how they're operating in the era of consolidation and in the era of privacy as well. So for instance, Reddit closed off external access to its inventory, right? Last year. Do you see that continuing? Do you see that being a problem for programmatic, that sources high quality traffic might be closed off into little pockets or big pockets, right? Very large pockets in various places, but you can't access them?
So I think in taking a step back and thinking about Reddit, I mean, hats off to them, right? I think that you really run into a scale issue. Reddit ultimately had the scale to be able to justify, that behavior. And I mean, I personally see nothing wrong with it. I think that like the impact from a user perspective, ultimately, everything aside, is you're able to actually control an experience and create something that feels very, very holistic to what you're trying to build through your platform, right? So, thinking about a Facebook or a Reddit or Pinterest would be a good example as well. Those are unique experiences. So they're actually able to invest in doubling down on creating an experience that is pleasant, for users. So it's like, I look at it like, I think it's great, ultimately.
More power to you, Daniel, because I'm an experienced person too. No, seriously, I did want to get to that point because at the end of the day, it is a business, right? You need ads for revenue, but you're also, as you said, you're trying to define and create great experiences, pleasant experiences, some ad-free, maybe some native in there, who knows? But how do you balance this? Because they are conflicting.
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing I'd say, shout out to our product team. I think that ultimately you want to start at the beginning. Now, the one thing I'd say, and this is probably the biggest learning that I've had at Wattpad, is sort of the difference between being solution oriented and the difference between actually like developing a robust strategy and a vision that fits with what you're trying to sort of manage. In the case of a Wattpad, it's a reading app. People are coming to read books. How many like video ads do you want to watch while you're reading a book? Like what is that, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I think, for us, a lot of what powered the growth is really tons and tons of experimentation, spending time with our users, talking to them, getting feedback, looking at, sentiment and analysis, running experiments to understand how small changes and experiences and what ads look and feel like impact the behavior of our users across the platform. And going back to that like value comment from earlier, is that ultimately like, is what you're doing, driven by that like value exchange? And is that value exchange honest? When I think about it, I think that what we've done that's been really, really interesting is we sort of started from looking at, what was the vision of the product we were actually trying to build? How do we make sure that we can, build the right internal metrics that aren't necessarily revenue driving, that help us understand, what metrics need to be true in order to drive value for our users. And it might be things like, how much time people spend reading, or how often they're coming back to the app, or are they writing enough, or any of those sort of components. So then when we're talking about revenue, knowing that advertising in particular, if not done properly, can detract from some of those, very important metrics, then it's a matter of just figuring out like, how do you find that balance? How do you make sure that, you either integrate ads in a sensible way, or you even spend the time to do something like communicate to your users around what the value of ads actually means. So we spent a ton of time doing that. The other thing I'd say that's been very, very, crucial in terms of how we've been able to grow is that we've over time developed relationships everywhere. I'm talking, I've spent time developing relationships with every site I can think of, any app I can think of, any monetization partner across the world. Like, as a global platform for a Wattpad, we have tons of inventory in the US, which is great, pretty straightforward to monetize, but we also have a huge, huge, huge community in Indonesia. So part of those conversations have been, hey, like, I get what's happening in the States. I understand that tons of investment there, very easy to figure out. Tell me about Indonesia. Tell me about, the Philippines. Like, how does programmatic work in some of those regions? So being able to take a global approach in terms of what you're trying to solve has also been very helpful for us.
Well, apparently you've done that very, very successfully because, as Peggy mentioned right off the top, you boosted programmatic ad revenue 15x across Wattpad. How'd you do that?
So I think at the beginning we spent a lot of time doing like classic, and I feel like I'm talking like a product person here, but classic discovery. Getting into the weeds around like what are the things from a programmatic perspective that we believe that we can invest in that feel like a good robust business opportunity for us to invest in. Where do we think the industry is going, and how do we make sure that we can be thoughtful around what that looks like. And the second thing that we did, and I'm a big advocate here, is build your systems and your infrastructure with scale in mind. Mm-hmm. So I sometimes feel like a broken record here, but when I look at the campaigns that we're running or the ad units that we have to name across all of our different partners, it's like, are we building naming conventions and reporting configurations in a way that actually gets us access to the data that we need in order to make intelligent decisions, right? At a leadership level, it's a matter of having conversations early on to say, okay, what business metrics and what do you guys need in order to make the right investment decisions across the org. So always having those types of conversations to make sure that you can go as wide and as deep as you need to, given the needs of the business, but also try to anticipate, what problems are going to come up in the future, and how can you make reasonable, trade-offs around, whatever those parts of investments are going to look like.
It sounds tremendously difficult because it sounds like you have to go right down to the very bottom level of all the details. What are the naming conventions? How do these come in? How do we report them? How do we aggregate them up? How do we sum them, total them, all that stuff? All the way up to the very highest points. What's our strategy? And how does that mean for product? What bought you the biggest return? What made the biggest performance difference for you? Was there any one or maybe 2, 3 things?
Yeah. So luckily, this didn't happen overnight. You start simple and then you scale, right? So it's about making sure that you're scaling appropriately. In terms of the things that drove the biggest differences, the first thing I would say, and believe it or not, this is genuinely a surprise to me, is that your mix of partners that you're working with can actually be more robust than it is. We got to a stage where I was like, I can't imagine that integrating, I don't know, iron source would actually bring us incremental revenue that was meaningful, and it happened. So I think that ultimately it's there's surprising incremental value in making sure that you have a very robust complex stack that's really functioning at a high level. The second thing that I'd say, and this probably is no surprise to any conversation that you've had, is spend the time to go deep on the data. The more that we do it, the more that we learn. The more that we do it, the more questions that we ask, right? But being able to go deep with the data is ultimately, it leads to decisions. It leads to more questions. It leads to investments that you could potentially make. I've been lucky to grow my team and to bring on some really smart people. And as a result of having more people on my team, I've been able to say, okay, great. How do we invest in building out more complex waterfalls that are indicative of the data that we're seeing across the world, right? Sometimes something like a price floor in countries that are under monetized, simply making some changes there can help, to drive revenue. We have done optimizations at Wattpad that have literally had MoPub come to us afterwards and say, I feel like our features don't work in the way that you guys are using it, and it's indicative to us that we need to change how we do things.
Huh.
Wow.
Learning from you.
Yeah. Well,
I have to stop for just a minute, John, because I don't know about you, but I've been talking to a lot of people, on our show, yes, but around the industry. And it was all about, what? Our data is toast. Let's cut back on the number of partners we're working with. Let's go from 14 to 3 is what I was hearing. And you're saying, no, work with more partners, be more
Yeah.
robust, build it out more. It's just take that risk, be brave, be bold, be big,
It is
right?
it is a different side of the
It is.
market, right? And we're talking to ad ops and
Yeah.
programmatic right now, where he's trying to monetize revenue. And so if you're looking for mediation partners, for instance, right, then
The more
that's
the
a
better.
slightly different challenge than looking for UA. And certainly for UA, especially in the era of iOS 14.5 and 15, if you spread everything and you've got too many ad campaigns going, too many campaign IDs going, you need volume in each of them to get past Apple's
Yeah.
privacy thresholds, right? So there's some challenges there, but it is really interesting, Peggy. I 100% agree. It's a different way of looking at the world.
I could probably help to smooth it out a bit. So I look at, so first of all, it's important to understand, as a Wattpad, we're massive. We have inventory everywhere, right?
Okay.
Now, as a publisher, all we can do is have users come use our platform, send out ad requests, and then get responses, right? If we limit the number of partners that we're using, we're essentially limiting the amount of opportunity that's out there. As a buyer, if I'm a buyer and I'm like, man, I'm buying on, MoPub, AppLovin, Bungle, Facebook, like it can get confusing or challenging or difficult to measure, who's performing best, right? As a buyer, I'm incentivized to find the best performing inventory in the best performing network. But as a seller, I'm incentivized to ensure that I'm trying to capture as much of spend as possible. So in a world where, for example, and I made this argument internally, if we don't work with a Unity and a buyer that is spending a tremendous amount of revenue on acquiring users that we have, and they decide to move all of their budget to Unity, we're not going to see any of that money. So, we need to kind of make sure that we're being, very broad in our approach to capture as much opportunity as possible.
So you raise a lot of questions. We've answered some of them, but not only on the show here, you answer the questions of the community. You have this amazing Reddit community, the biggest one there is out there for ad ops. Tell us about that, where the idea came from,
So
the inspiration to stay.
So it's actually pretty funny because I've been on Reddit for a number of years. I mean, I think I started probably back in 2008. It's been a while. So I worked for a company a number of years ago, and we went through a period where our team had grown tremendously, and we'd actually gone through a cycle over about 6 or 8 months where we hired, I think it was like 6 or 7 interns. And I'd noticed as Reddit as a platform was growing and I was spending more time on it, that one, there was very little discussion around sort of the state of ad ops, which is obviously an industry that I was involved in. And we basically went through this hiring round, hired a bunch of young people. They were all fresh out of school. They were all, very interested in technology. And I noticed that, after getting to know a bunch of these people, that the one thing that they tended to have in common was they were all on Reddit. So I kind of put 2 and 2 together and I said, so you're telling me that young, tech-savvy, exciting, interesting people are all on Reddit? And this whole domain that, people get the people that we hired were pretty excited about working in digital. They don't have, ultimately they didn't have enough avenues to learn. So, we kind of said, hey guys, what if we tried to build out this community? Somebody had already created the community. It had, 20 people subscribed to it. It wasn't very active. So I was able to connect with them, and we had a couple of calls in person. And we said, hey, what do we need to do in order to try and build up this community? So I sort of, created little OKRs for the team to say, hey guys, you have an OKR once a week. I want you guys to try and find an article that, that's talking about the space that you think is interesting, and try and post that way. I would say it worked and it didn't work. Some people were more interested in it than others, but I think that ultimately, the way that things kind of grew over time is, going back to that complexity point, is that the technology and the complexity and the scale of it continued to change as programmatic really started to take center stage across the industry. So, the community as a result ended up just growing. More people had more questions. There were more gaps in knowledge. So it became a hub for people to meet and connect around questions that they had. So I'm really happy that we've been able to build a really positive community that's curious.
I think that's super cool. And I guess if you're looking for new talent, it would be a great place to be and be hanging out and see who's got smart ideas and who's sharing interesting thoughts and everything like that, and who has the right answers. Well, our time is coming to a close, but we ask all of our guests for their top 3 tips in their area of expertise. Yours, of course, ad monetization. What are your top 3 tips for ad monetization in 2022?
Yeah, it's a great question. The number one tip I'd say is always be curious. Spend time asking questions. Spend time asking why questions, particularly if you're maybe more junior, you're trying to figure out like, how do I learn? I don't want to know what's happening. I want to know why things are happening. If you spend the time really trying to go deep and understand like how all of this tech is working, you'll generally be on the right track. The second thing is that I think it's really, really important to keep up to date with what's happening in the space. So whether it be talking to people, spending time to do research and understand what's actually like going on in the space. On the app side specifically, with this MoPub acquisition, what we're seeing is a lot of these mediation platforms are they're basically saying, hey, there's an opportunity here to listen to apps in a totally different way, build new features, introduce new opportunities that bring more value to app monetization tools. So, ensuring that you're spending time like learning about where the stuff is going, talking to these different platforms. Max is certainly building really, really robust platform with said market. Iron Source is there trying to make sure that they continue to remain competitive. You have Google is obviously Google. So making sure that we're focused on driving as much value as possible. And then the third thing I would say, and this is a soft challenge to my team if they decide to watch this, push your partners for more insights. Push them. I don't believe that we get enough information. I don't believe that we understand enough about what's actually happening here. So in a world where you have an app that's making millions of dollars a year, you don't know exactly why that's happening with as much detail as possible, then your revenue is ultimately going to be at risk. So spending the time with your partners to figure out what are advertisers valuing in your inventory, what's working for them, what's not working for them, why is it not working, how is it working? All of those things will help you make more informed decisions, will help you invest in growing the experiences and features within your app that translate to stronger revenue gains in the future. So I don't know. I guess it's one of those like bottomless pits that I'm always like making sure that my team is.
That's a really tough one. Hey? It's when things are going well, then the temptation is, hey, it's going well. What was happening? Why dig too deep, right? But you're saying, hey, dig in, find out why it's going well, and make sure that we know as much as we can so we can continue it and maybe even make it better. Love it.
That's right.
Well, wonderful. Peggy, I think I would be on the same page as you, saying we'd love having Daniel for our guest. It was super interesting, super informative, and a different picture in what we've been looking at for the past year.
And also I was going to say that it's the bravery to ask the questions. I thought before that was, don't do it, but I guess you guys are on speed dial with your partners. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
we have Slack channels running with everybody. By 10 o'clock every Monday, my she is on my team. He's, hey guys, I'm noticing that over the weekends you overperform what you normally do. Why?
I don't know. Keep it going. And anyways, Daniel, thank you so much for being our guest. Really do appreciate it. For everybody who's watching or listening, hey, if you're listening, there's also a video and it's on YouTube. Check it out. If you're watching, there's the podcast. Subscribe to that. If you're a mobile hero, hey, Peggy wants to hear from you. I want to hear from you. Connect with us, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever. We'd love shining a light on mobile marketers with superpowers like Daniel, and get in touch with us. We'd love to chat with you.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
Daniel.